They say dopamine floods your brain when something unexpected happens, like a drug slipping into your system before you even realize it. 1 second, everything is normal. The next, there's a rush, a shift, a heightened awareness that lingers long after the moment has passed. That's exactly what happened that afternoon, though I wouldn't fully understand it until later. It was a slow, lazy day, the kind where time stretches and everything feels calm. My son, Damon, had just turned 18, a milestone that came with a mix of emotions for both of us. He was no longer a child, but not yet fully grown, standing at that in-between stage where independence and familiarity still coexist. We had always been close, our bond strong, built on years of trust and open conversation. That afternoon, we sat in the backyard, talking about nothing in particular, letting the warmth of the sun settle over us. At some point, he mentioned needing to pee. It was nothing unusual, just a passing comment. Without much thought, I gestured toward the trees, telling him he could go outside. It was just nature, after all. He hesitated for a moment, then shrugged and did as I suggested. As he stood there, I found myself watching, not out of anything inappropriate, but with a strange sense of appreciation for how natural it all seemed. There was something freeing about it, something unfiltered, something that made me pause. And then, almost without thinking, I did the same. I stood up, lifted the hem of my sundress, and let go, feeling the cool breeze against my skin, the soft grass beneath my feet. It was instinctual, something primal, something that felt both rebellious and right at the same time. For a brief moment, it was like stepping outside of a boundary I hadn't even realized existed. Like a rush of adrenaline, a surge of dopamine, the kind that comes when you do something unexpected, something you weren't supposed to do, yet something that feels entirely natural. But highs don't last forever. As quickly as the moment came, it passed. And in its place, a strange awareness crept in. A heaviness. A realization that something about this moment would stay with me, not because of what had happened, but because of how it had made me feel. Why had it felt like stepping over an invisible line? Why did my body react before my mind could even form a thought? The high was wearing off. But when it was gone, what was I left with? What happens when the rush fades and the reality of the moment settles in? The moment passed, but the feeling didn't. It lingered, creeping into my thoughts long after we had both gone inside, like the slow come down from a high, the kind that leaves you questioning whether what you felt was real or just a trick of your own mind. But as the rush faded, another sensation took its place: doubt. Unease. The gnawing realization that something about this experience had pushed me beyond the boundaries I had never dared to examine before. Why had it felt so different? So heavy? After all, there was nothing unnatural about it. Just two people existing in the world, unfiltered and unrestrained. And yet, my heart told me that wasn't entirely true. Because we don't exist in isolation. We exist within rules, within expectations, within a society that tells us what is acceptable and what is not, what is natural and what should be hidden, what is innocent and what is questionable. From the time we're children, we're taught that privacy is a necessity, that bodies are to be covered, that exposure, both physical and emotional, comes with consequences. We learn that certain things belong behind closed doors, that some actions are only appropriate in solitude, and that even in our most natural states, there are rules that must be followed. And as I sat there, turning the moment over in my mind, I realized just how deeply ingrained those rules had become in me. Was my discomfort truly my own? Or was it the weight of everything I had been taught pressing down on me? Being a parent only complicates these questions further. Because once you become a mother, your identity splits. You are no longer just yourself. You are someone's protector, someone's guide, someone whose needs and desires must always take a back seat to the responsibilities of raising another human being. Your role is defined by sacrifice, by restraint, by a constant, unspoken rule that you must always be composed, appropriate, and careful. But what happens when that role collides with the reality of simply being human? I had spent years shaping myself around what a mother should be: strong, nurturing, always in control. And yet, here I was, shaken by something as simple as a moment of unfiltered existence. Why? It had reminded me that I was still a person, separate from my title as a parent, with thoughts and feelings that didn't always fit neatly into the role I was supposed to play. It was unsettling, this confrontation between who I had been before and who I had become. Even more unsettling was the realization that maybe I had stopped allowing myself to feel certain things because I had been told I wasn't supposed to anymore. Maybe this wasn't just about boundaries. Maybe it was about the quiet erasure of the self that happens when you dedicate your life to raising someone else. The moment in the backyard had cracked something open, and now I couldn't ignore what was spilling out. But what was I supposed to do with that? If anyone had been watching this unfold from the outside, I know exactly what question they'd be asking first. Where is his father? It's a fair question. Because every story has a beginning, and mine didn't start with just me and my son. It started with the man who helped bring him into this world. Adam and I had been married for years, and our relationship had never been conventional. From the start, we believed that love didn't have to mean restriction. We had an open marriage, but with one unbreakable rule. We had to approve of each other's choices. No secrets, no hidden desires. If one of us wanted someone new, the other had to know, had to be okay with it, had to acknowledge that this was about excitement, not a lack of love. That day, Adam was with someone else. I knew about her, had even seen her a few times in passing. She wasn't a threat, just another piece of the life we had built together. While he was gone, I had already begun scanning for my own opportunity, waiting to see who might show interest, who might step forward and make the first move. That was always the rule. I never pursued, only responded. I liked who liked me. Simple. Fair. And because of that, I had never been picky. Handsome, ugly, tall, short, it never mattered. If a man had the courage to show interest, I saw that as enough reason to give him a chance. I never fantasized about celebrities or wasted time thinking about men who didn't already want me. I didn't believe in attraction without action. My choices were always practical, driven by who was willing, not by my own personal longing. But then that moment happened. That small, insignificant moment in the backyard, where Damon, my son, stood next to me, relieving himself into the open air without hesitation. A moment that should have passed without a second thought. And yet, something inside me, some deep, buried instinct, reacted before my mind could even catch up. I felt something shift. Not in an inappropriate way, but in a way that made me realize, for the first time in my life, that attraction wasn't just about who wanted me first. Attraction wasn't just about choice. It wasn't just about who came to me first. It was about what stirred something inside me, what woke up parts of me I hadn't even realized were asleep. And the most unsettling part? I had never experienced that feeling before. Not with Adam. Not with anyone. The rule had always been simple. I waited for men to pursue me. But now, for the first time in my life, I had to wonder, what happens when I want something first? The next day, I moved through the motions of the morning, making coffee. It was a Saturday, so there was no rush to get ready. As usual, I went to check on Damon, a routine I had always followed. That's when I noticed it, his erection. Maybe it was because of what had happened the other day in the garden. I couldn't resist teasing him. All right, I think it's time I see what you've got down there, I said playfully. He let out a laugh. Are you being serious? I smirked. I'm just teasing you, but it's grown. He chuckled. Well, that's true. Curious, I gave it a little squeeze. Come on, let's see it then. And just like that, he pulled his boxers down. Well, there it was. I raised an eyebrow. Wow, yep, you're becoming a man now. I didn't touch it a lot, but I held his bell hanger for a while, and we could not hold back the desires, so he plunged his thick tool into my pie. I thought about Adam. About how our marriage had been built on openness, on mutual understanding, on the idea that love and attraction didn't have to exist in opposition. We had made rules to protect our relationship, but maybe, just maybe, I had been using those rules as a way to avoid facing my desires. It was easier to say, I'll wait for someone to choose me, than it was to acknowledge that I had choices of my own, that I could want something first. That realization unsettled me more than I wanted to admit. Because if I was questioning this now, what else might I begin to question? As I sat at the kitchen table, absent-mindedly running my fingers along the rim of my mug, I heard footsteps approaching. A familiar presence entered the room, and without thinking, I glanced up, studying his face in a way I hadn't before. Had I changed, or had I simply become aware of something that was always there? "You're quiet this morning," he said casually, pouring himself a glass of water. I hesitated as if the weight of my thoughts could be spoken aloud. But what could I even say? That I had spent the last 12 hours thinking of how I cheated with Damon? Or that I have found someone else, and I'm ready to spice up our marriage? Instead, I simply smiled and said, "Just thinking." And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't sure where those thoughts would take me.